Good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome you all to our 30-minute 2016 Chamber of the Year process webinar. On the registrant list, I see we have some repeat applicants as well as some new interested chambers, which is very, very exciting. I am Michelle Viglianti, and I will be your main contact as you move forward in the Chamber of the Year award process. And I'm joined here by Brad Lacy, who's President and CEO of the Conway Area Chamber of Commerce. Brad wears a lot of hats here at ACCE. He's a board member, a former 2013 Chamber of the Year winner, and he's also the chairman of the Chamber of the Year committee. So we're very fortunate to have him here on this webinar to really give an insider perspective on the process of applying for Chamber of the Year. Before we begin, I just want to let everyone know that at the end of the presentation, we'll be answering any questions you may have. If you have a question at any time during the presentation, please just type it into the question box on your screen, and you should see it on the side panel there. We're going to try to get to all the questions once the presentation is over, and I'll ask them in line of when they were received. So without further ado, I'm going to hand this off to Brad to give an overview of the Chamber of the Year Award and to what we're going to learn about in today's webinar. So Brad?
Yeah, thanks Michelle. Welcome everybody. Real quickly, you can see there, we'll really try to hit on four things today. One is the application process itself and the key dates that you need to have on your calendar to make sure that you meet those deadlines. Also, Michelle's going to go into some more detail about ACCE's dynamic chamber benchmark to try to help you understand, that's the basis of how this process gets started. So you really need to understand that to be successful. Then we'll spend some time on the requirements for qualification, and then I'll spend a little time with you talking about an insider perspective on applying and really take that from the perspective of someone who has been through the process and then someone who has judged the process.
Great, thank you. So the first part is qualifying. The Chamber of the Year Award is a process to apply is very involved. Anyone who's been through it before knows that there are certain steps you must go through in order to advance throughout the process. And the first of these steps is to qualify. So before you can even apply, you must meet certain criteria to be invited. The first part of qualifying is inputting your operations data. And I'm sure many of you have heard by now of dynamic chamber benchmarking. Dynamic chamber benchmarking is a platform that houses your chamber profile, the ACCE operations survey, and the ACCE salary survey. As a side note, I just want to let everyone know that this is a fantastic tool on its own for chambers to use to compare their statistics. It really allows you to instantly download reports and benchmark your data against similar chambers. It's also a free tool for anyone who's an ACCE member. So just so you know that. But what does the platform mean for you in Chamber of the Year? You must complete 2 of the modules in this platform in order to be considered for eligibility. You have to complete the operations survey and the chamber profile. I want you to know that this is an ongoing year-long process. However, in order to be considered for Chamber of the Year eligibility, you must get your numbers in by February 26th. So that is your first hard deadline. We're going to be pulling numbers on February 27th, so please make sure you complete both modules by the 26th. And note that you have to include your fiscal year 2015 data in the process. So I quickly just want to show you what dynamic chamber benchmarking with the platform looks like when you first log in so you're familiar with it. Anyone on your staff can fill this out, so that's important to know. It doesn't just have to be your CEO, it could be anyone. This is what the homepage looks like. You'll see there's 2 sections that you have to fill out. Section 1 is the chamber profile, and Section 2 is the operations survey. Those must be done. The third section, if you're CEO and you log in, you might see the salary survey. I want you to know that this section is not required for Chamber of the Year eligibility. However, it's a really useful tool, and if you can, I suggest you fill it out anyway. but it does not have any bearing on Chamber of the Year. Again, I want you to know that you must input your fiscal year 2015 data. So when you log on to the platform and you go to the first section, which is your chamber profile, please make sure that the fiscal year 2015 is toggled. That way we can pull the correct numbers for you. Also on that chamber profile section, please note that there is a question that you must fill out. It's the Chamber of the Year Award question. It's the last question on the page. And it just asks if you intend to apply. Please click yes. If you click no or you leave it blank, the system won't pull your chamber for consideration because they think that you don't want to apply. So now that we have a sort of idea of dynamic chamber benchmarking, I'm going to pass it over to Brad to talk a little bit more about the qualification criteria. Because once you put in your numbers, it's time to see whether you qualify. So Brad?
Yeah, so we're going to look at 5 requirements, and everybody has to meet 3 out of these 5 requirements. And those are your positive net income, so making sure that total revenue minus total expenses equals a positive number there, so that you're in good financial shape. Also, retention strength as it relates to membership dollars. So 85% of the value of your membership dollars must be retained in the previous year. And then we move on to the actual retention strength of those accounts themselves, and that the percentage of those accounts that renew are equal to or more than 82%. Then the current assets to current liabilities must result in a ratio of 1.0 or greater. And then on net assets, your total assets minus total liabilities must equal or exceed 0. So all those are obviously self-explanatory. You can see them there on the screen. Next slide, Michelle. So we will notify you by March 16th via email or hard copy that you qualify based on what you have filled out in that dynamic benchmarking survey. And then we'll have a conference call. And the different categories. So this is always a question that people ask, is how are you placed in categories? And we will determine that category, and right now we're standing at 4 categories. Now that can change, so let me give you an example. When we have a large number of applications in a certain category, so Michelle, help me here. Last year we had a lot of applications in category 4, and then there looked to be a natural breaking point where we could then separate that category 4 into a 4 and a 5. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes. But
so,
the standard is a category 1 through 4.
Right. And you're going to be put in those categories based on the population of your area, the number of businesses in your area, the total revenue that you have as a chamber, the percentage of total revenue that is restricted, and then your number of current members. And if you'll note there at the bottom, one of the changes that we wanted to make this year was to have a separate category for state chambers. And I think we have some state chambers on the phone. So if we get 3 or more applications from state chambers, we will break that off into its own category so you're competing against other organizations that are like you. Move on. There you go. So you can take a look here at those 5 categories that we mentioned on the previous slide to see how those line up with categories 1 through 4. You know, a question that I asked Michelle before we got on here that I was unclear on was, you know, if you are in category 2 on 3 of these and category 3 on the remaining 2, what category are you put in? And they actually use a mathematical equation that takes all of this information into account and then puts you in a category. So it's not kind of a majority wins where you're in category 3 for the majority of them. It wouldn't necessarily mean you would end up there. It's based on that equation. Michelle, anything you want to add there?
Brad, this is Ian. I wanted to jump in and just add a slightly finer point on the category 5 that we did have last year. You can see the category thresholds for each of the 5 qualifying metrics on the screen. Last year we looked at the applicant pool in 4, and it was almost split, with about half the group who would have been in 4 with double in almost each of those 5 areas, double those numbers, which just felt and looked like a natural break. So for anybody on the call who's questioning, how we got to where we got to last year, it almost spoke for itself, and it was also the single largest category by far, clearly a break among the applicants. So while we want to be completely transparent with any applicants about how the whole process goes, we also want to exercise a little bit of judgment, which is also the reason why we're actively inviting state chambers to apply. And if we get a number of state chamber applicants, we will create a separate category for them, as you already mentioned, Brad.
Thank you, Ian and Brad. So let's say you go through dynamic chamber benchmarking and you get a notice on March 16th saying you qualify. The next process is to actually apply. So we're just going to talk quickly about the application itself. On your screen are the key dates you need to know for when you're applying. You will have 5 weeks from when you're notified that you are eligible to submit your application. So applications are due via Dropbox on April 20th. And Brad had mentioned earlier of a conference call. So around the week of March 21st, for those who are eligible to apply, we're going to hold a very informal conference call. Brad will be on the line, maybe a couple other winners, and we'll just sort of talk about the process. They'll go through, what makes a successful application, what topics you should consider choosing for your synopses, how to submit via Dropbox, etc. So it's just informal. It's not mandatory, but we find that it's very helpful for applicants to sort of understand, which direction they should be headed in. So you'll see those, and then the application itself. So what does the application actually include? You can download the application now on ACCE's website. When I send a follow-up email after this webinar, I'll also include an attachment to the application so you can see what it looks like. But essentially, it has a couple components. The first is you're going to be required to submit some of your 2015 financial documents, such as audits. The second are short answer questions. There'll be a couple short answer questions that are related to membership and operations. We'll also have you required to submit some of your marketing and communication collateral. And then you'll have 2 program synopses. That's going to really be the bulk of the application, are going to be these 2 synopses. And we're talking a little bit about what you should consider when choosing synopses. And then you'll see there's a $250 application fee, waived if you're an ACCE Horizon investor. So, Brad, I'm going to toss it over to you to talk about the reality of applying.
Sure. So a few things here that I want to touch on from, my perspective as someone who's gone through the process, and then having a somewhat different perspective as a judge is what we would call just the reality of applying. You really need to take this seriously if you're serious about winning, I should say. So this should be something where, in my opinion, you have senior level people working on this. There is a dramatic difference every year in the quality of applications that come in, and in some respects, you know, I can hear judges say, you know, that they question who put it together, you know, that they would expect better. So, you know, really take it seriously and put, you know, senior level people on this. Then, you know, carefully choose those program synopses, and let me focus on that for a minute and kind of expand on what I mean by carefully choosing those. You know, we are looking for chambers that other chambers in our area can benchmark. So I think for me on the year that we won, I felt strongly about maybe the innovation level of a couple of the programs that we had done the previous year, and felt like they were worthy of writing a synopsis on. And there are times where I feel like, you know, there are good chambers that apply, but those synopses are nothing special. There's something that chambers are doing all across America. There's no innovation in it, or there is no wow factor. And I can tell you that that's what a judge is looking for. I mean, you are being judged by a group of your peers, and so they know when something is just sort of normal. So really think about the quality of your programming, and if it merits consideration for Chamber of the Year, because if it doesn't, you're going to be going up against people who are doing some pretty amazing things. The next one is the actual organization of the application. You're dealing with volunteer judges who care deeply about this profession, I might add, and the easier it is for a judge to get through your application, the better off you are. So look at the way that it is supposed to be put together and make sure that your response piece corresponds with that exactly. I can tell you that when we put ours together, we spent probably 1 to 2 hours upon completing it in a room, going over each page of the application and making sure it was in the appropriate order, because we wanted to make sure that when a judge looked at that, it was very easy to compare the answer to the question. And sometimes those applications are not organized very well, and that's frustrating, because you want to, if someone has answered the question or provided the data, you want to be able to find it, and when you can't, it just really makes it hard to judge. So be sure that you organize it appropriately. The next one seems fairly simple, but you know, we see people struggle with it every year, which is answer the question. I mean, there are a series of questions that are pretty clear-cut, and there are people who answer those questions, and then there are people who do not answer the question but still put something in that space. And so, you know, this is where I would let multiple people read those responses to make sure that you are really answering the question in a way that you know, that we can understand. And sometimes they're just bad answers. And you know, provide what's asked for. I mean, you know, if and Ian, help me here. We ask for 3 years of financials, correct?
Yes.
2 years.
Okay.
2 years.
So,
Sorry.
2 years.
Past 2 years.
2 years. So let me give you an example, because this happens every year. We ask for 2 years. There will be somebody who will put an application together and they'll put 1 year. Well, you know, so then a judge has to decide, is that a 0 or do you give partial credit? You know, and people judge a little bit differently, but I mean, we're looking for the most outstanding chamber in America, or in our service area, in each of these categories. So, you know, if you can't follow a simple instruction and put 2 years worth of financials in in the application, then are you the Chamber of the Year? And I think every judge has to ask themselves that. And then finally, let me spend some time on the actual interview itself. So you need to be very thoughtful about who you bring to the interview if you make it into the finals. And it really needs to be two people who understand the inner workings of your organization and can answer pretty in-depth questions. If you bring a board member, in my opinion, that board member should have a very strong working or a very strong understanding of the work that you're doing, because it does not help you if one of the two people in the interview process adds nothing to the interview. And there are times that happens, and in those times when that happens, I feel like it's probably the wrong person sitting in that seat, because everyone wants to hear, I think every judge wants to hear from both people in those chairs that day. And I've judged before where the one of the two people in the room can't answer what we would consider to be fairly simple questions about how the chamber operates. So be cognizant of that. Be sure that you pick the right person, because it is your chance to, you've made it that far, so be sure that you pick the right team to go in there and represent your organization. And trust me, I understand how hard that can be, because then, if you're picking a staff person, you have to pick one. if you're the exec, and I understand that can be hard among your folks internally, but you have to get that right. Next slide.
Hey, Brad, can I back up just a minute? I'd like to elaborate just a little bit on the program synopses bullet point. I think you covered it well. I just wanted to put a slightly finer point on one of the biggest questions we get every year, and that's, what's this 1 year of work kind of thing? We want Chamber of the Year applicants to write program synopses where they significantly advanced the work in that previous calendar year. So we want the work that you did in 2015 to be the star. We don't expect that everything in your synopses was initiated, conceived, funded, executed, and reported on in 12 months. The judges know that's unrealistic, so they know you're going to have to go back further when you're talking about the development of most of the things that would qualify as a program synopsis. Occasionally there's something that just gets all done in 12 months, just fortuitously, but a lot of times this is the culmination of a lot of work. But again, I just want to underscore, we want to evaluate work that really came to fruition and was advanced significantly in the past calendar year.
Yeah, that's a good point, and let me add something to that as well, that just came to me. Another thing that I've seen chambers do is they don't do a great job of explaining what they actually did in relation to the program that they're speaking about. So an example would be, if you recruited a new company to the community that brought 1,000 jobs. I've seen applications where the only thing we could gather from it was that the chamber was there for the press release, and that there is no doubt that it's a great news for the community, that it has a significant economic impact on your members and your community. But if you cannot explain what you specifically did to get the project to come to your community, you will not score well. And so keep that in mind as you write each of those synopses. Be sure that you are very specific about about what your organization did to, make these things happen. Because often I don't think those are written well, and so the judge is left to decide, well, did they do anything, or are they just taking credit for something that the city did or some other entity in the community? So be sure that you pick something where you can, quantifiably show what you've done. All right, we'll move on to judging, and we'll start with the application process itself. So a judging panel is made up of past Chamber of the Year winners, board members, and or veteran chamber CEOs. And the way the scoring works is that 1/3 of that score comes from the short answers, the collateral pieces, and the financial documents, and then 2/3 come from the program synopses that we've referred to. So you can see that those two projects are very important to select. Next slide. So the finalists are announced on June 15th. Then final interviews are at ACCE, which this year will be in Savannah, August 9th. And then the winners are announced the following evening, August 10th. And I will tell you that when you walk into the convention center in Savannah, 1/3 of your score is coming in with you. So that's a common question is, how much of the application score is coming to the final judging, and that is 1/3. So 2/3 of that score is coming from the interview, which goes back to the point I made before about carefully selecting the person who accompanies you into the interview process, because the stakes are high in those interviews. And then just some hints for what you can do now. We would encourage you to talk to past winners, board members, or staff members to assess, whether or not you should apply. Talk through those potential programs that you're looking to submit and see what other people say about them. Then browse some samples that ACCE has and will provide from past winners to see what those look like. Ensure that those financials are in order, and then be sure that you get all of your data into dynamic chamber benchmarking, because that's obviously the first bar that you have to cross. And then please ask questions. I mean, there are plenty of folks both at ACCE headquarters and then those of us who have been through the process before that can offer really helpful hints.
Great. Thank you so much, Brad. We only have about 2 minutes left, so we probably only have time for about 1 or 2 questions. So if we don't get to your question, I know we have a lot in the queue. I will follow up with everyone tomorrow with their question and an answer to their question. I just want to ask, this one's for Brad. It was actually given earlier, and it's who were the core staff members that really worked on the application? Is it the CEO, or is it were you involved at all?
I was very involved. Honestly, I can't imagine a situation where you're not involved at some level. So my entire senior staff was involved with every part of it. If we won or lost, in my opinion, that should be coming from the senior part of the organization. I would never want to, look at an intern or, someone who had just been there a year and wonder if they could have done a better job. So, I mean, we just felt like we should be the ones to touch that document, put it together, and send it in.
Thank you. Another question we have is, and this is a question that we get often, is how many points are deducted when you go over the word limit? And for those of you who haven't applied, there are word limits to all the questions, especially in the synopses, and you have to, answer within a concise amount of words. So Brad, as a judge, how do you feel about word counts, and how does it affect the judging from your perspective?
Well, I mean, I'm not going to sit there and count your words, but if it's clear that you're, way over, that would probably impact some people more than others. You want to be really fair. So when people, I mean, those word counts are there for a reason, and if it's clear that you're, going over on every question, then yeah, you're probably going to see some deductions from folks.
And I'll also add in to what Brad said about that is, one thing Brad said in the beginning is answer the question. That was one of his tips. And the word counts really help you. A lot of times when you don't have a word count and you can go over, people tend to, add things in that really don't matter or don't really get to the core of the question. So really sticking to those word counts do help you just really get to the core of what you're trying to say.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, we were forced to be much more succinct than probably we would have normally been.
Which is a good thing.
Yeah.
Well, we're actually a minute over, so we're going to wrap up. And like I said, for the questions we didn't get to, I will follow up tomorrow via email with your answer. I'll also follow up tomorrow with this presentation, a recording of this presentation, and links to dynamic chamber benchmarking and various other information that you might find helpful. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. My information's up on the screen. And I just wanted to give a huge thank you to Brad again for taking the time to talk with everyone. It's really valuable when you're able to get on the line and give a perspective from someone who's applied and won before. So thank you again, Brad.
Sure.
All right, well, we're going to end it, and everyone have a wonderful afternoon.